The Council laughed at Earth, and then they spent years bracing for our fleet of revenge. And when the fleet finally came, when humanity at last returned to the Council that had mocked us, it was not the fleet they feared, and it was not made of the thing they thought, and it changed the galaxy in a way that no war fleet in history ever could have, because it was not a weapon at all. It was an answer. And I was one of the people who built it, out among the stars in the years they thought we were sulking, and I want to tell you exactly what we built and why, because the galaxy still tells this story wrong, still tells it as a tale of human might, and it was never about might. It was about who you stand with. It was about the thing the Council had forgotten could be a kind of power, the thing they had spent 10,000 years making sure no one remembered, until a mocked little world from the edge of nowhere went out and reminded the whole galaxy that the small are only weak as long as they stand alone. Let me start with the laughter, because the laughter is where it began, and because you have to understand how completely they dismissed us to understand what we did with the dismissal. My name is Cassandra, Cass, mostly, and I was a junior member of Earth's first delegation to the Galactic Council, back when humanity was new and small, and had just begun to reach out into the wider galaxy, hopeful and naive, the way you are when you first arrive somewhere you've dreamed of for generations. We had worked so hard to get there. You have to understand that. For all of human history, we had looked up at the stars and wondered if anyone was out there, and then we had learned that yes, there was a whole civilized galaxy, an ancient order of peoples governed by a great council, and we had wanted more than anything to be part of it, to take our place among the peoples of the stars, to belong to the great community we had dreamed of for so long. We came to the Council not as conquerors, not even as supplicants exactly, but as hopeful newcomers, a young people knocking on the door of a house we had longed to enter our whole existence, certain that once they saw us, once they knew us, we would be welcomed. You should know what we brought with us, because it tells you everything about who we were before the laughter changed us. We did not bring weapons to the Council, or threats, or even much in the way of leverage, because we did not think we would need them. We brought the best of ourselves. We brought gifts, our art, our music, the things our species had made that we were proudest of, carried across the stars in the hope that the great peoples of the galaxy might find them beautiful too. We brought our knowledge, modest as it was by their standards, offered freely, the way you bring a dish to a gathering you've been invited to. We brought our history, our long hard climb, the story of a people who had survived their own worst tendencies and learned, slowly and painfully, to be better. A story we were quietly proud of and thought might mean something. And we brought, more than anything, our hope. The simple, enormous, defenseless hope of a people who had been alone in the universe for their entire history, and had just discovered they were not alone after all, and wanted with their whole hearts to belong. I remember the journey there. I remember the mood on our ship as we approached the Council world, the nervousness, yes, but underneath it a kind of joy, a disbelieving gladness that this was actually happening, that we were really going, that humanity was about to take its place among the stars. People wept on that voyage, just from the wonder of it. The older members of our delegation, the ones who had spent their whole careers working toward this, who had given their lives to the dream of humanity reaching out and being received. Some of them could barely speak for the emotion of it. We had dressed in our best. We had rehearsed our speeches 100 times, not because we feared rejection, but because we wanted so badly to do this right, to be worthy of the welcome we were sure was coming. We were like a family arriving at a long-awaited reunion, our arms full of gifts, our hearts full of hope, certain of the embrace waiting on the other side of the door. I have never before or since seen my people so purely, so vulnerably hopeful. And I am glad, in a strange way, that I saw it, that I got to see us like that just once, before they taught us what the galaxy actually was. Because that hope was real, and it was beautiful, and what we did later, the thing that changed the galaxy, we did not do in spite of having been that hopeful. We did it because we remembered being that hopeful, and we could not bear that anyone else should have it taken from them the way it was taken from us. They laughed at us. I was there. I stood in that vast chamber, in the great hall of the Galactic Council, surrounded by the representatives of the mighty old civilizations of the galaxy, and I watched our delegation make its case, humble, earnest, full of the things we thought we could offer, the things we hoped would matter, and I watched the great powers of the Council receive us with an amusement so total and so casual that it took me a long moment to understand that we were being laughed at, not debated. Not rejected even in any formal way. Laughed at, because we were small, because we were poor by their measure, one world, a handful of colonies, no great fleet, no vast resources, no strategic weight, nothing that the cold arithmetic of galactic power respected. We were a minor people from an unfashionable corner of the galaxy, presuming to take a seat at the table of the mighty, and the mighty found the presumption funny. They looked at Earth, one small blue world, alone, with its hopeful delegation and its earnest little speeches. And they laughed, the way the powerful laugh at the powerless who don't yet understand how powerless they are. I can still see the moment it turned. Our chief delegate, a good man, a thoughtful man who had prepared his whole life for this, was in the middle of his address, the careful, hopeful speech we had all helped write, the one that laid out what humanity was and what we hoped to offer and why we wished to join the great community of the Council. And he was doing well, I thought, speaking with dignity and warmth, and I was watching the faces of the great powers arrayed before us, looking for the welcome we expected, and instead I watched a representative of one of the mightiest civilizations, a being whose name I would later learn and never forget, lean over to a neighbor mid-speech and say something, quietly, and smile. And the neighbor smiled too. And it rippled outward, that smile, that private amusement, spreading across the great powers of the chamber as our delegate spoke on, not yet seeing it, still earnestly making his case to a room that had stopped listening and started enjoying itself. They were not even cruel about it. That's the thing I keep coming back to. There was no malice in it. It was worse than malice. It was the easy, careless amusement of people watching a child give a very serious speech about a very small thing, a fondness that was entirely contempt, the warm condescension of the great toward the tiny. And when our delegate finished and there was a silence, and then one of the great powers spoke, not to refute us, not to debate our petition, but to make a small witticism at our expense, a light remark about the ambitions of little worlds, the chamber laughed. Openly. The mighty civilizations of the galaxy laughed together at the small blue world that had crossed the stars full of hope, and our delegate stood there and took it, and I stood behind him and watched my whole species be turned into a joke in the span of a breath. I looked at the faces of our own delegation in that moment, and that is the image I carried away, more than the laughing council, our own people's faces as they understood. The older ones, the ones who had hoped longest, who had given everything for this dream of belonging. I watched the hope go out of them. I watched something they had carried their whole lives, the belief that out there among the stars was a community that would welcome us, that we were reaching toward something good. I watched it die, in real time in their faces under that laughter. One of them, a woman who had spent 40 years working toward this day, simply closed her eyes, and I have never seen a face hold so much grief so quietly. We had come so far, with our arms full of gifts and our hearts full of hope, and we were being laughed out of the room, and the worst of it was that we could not even be angry yet, because we were still too busy being heartbroken. I have carried that laughter my whole life. I want to be honest about what it did to me because it did something and the something mattered. It was not the rejection that hurt. We could have borne rejection, a sober "you are not ready, come back when you've grown." It was the contempt. It was the way they did not even consider us worth taking seriously, the way our whole world, everything we were and hoped to be, registered to them as a joke, a small amusement, a thing beneath their notice. There is a particular wound that comes from being dismissed, not hated, not feared, just dismissed, waved away as insignificant by people who have decided you do not matter enough to even argue with. It is a wound that goes very deep, deeper than hatred would, because hatred at least acknowledges you exist. Dismissal denies even that. And I stood in that chamber and felt my whole species be dismissed, and I felt the wound of it go into me, and into all of us, the whole delegation, and we left that hall changed, carrying a thing that the council, in its amused certainty, had not bothered to notice it was handing us. Because here is what the council did not understand about the laughter, the thing that would, in the end, undo them. When you laugh at someone, you teach them something. You think you are teaching them their place, but you are also teaching them exactly what your weakness is. The council laughed at Earth because we were small and alone, and in doing so they told us, without meaning to, the entire secret of how their power worked and how it could be broken, because we were not the only ones who had been laughed at. We were not the only small people, the only minor world, the only dismissed and overlooked species in that galaxy. We were just the newest. And as we left that chamber, smarting, humiliated, carrying our dismissal, one of our delegation, an old woman, our eldest, who had said almost nothing the whole time, said the thing that became the seed of everything. She said, "They can only laugh at us because we came alone. Did you see how many others they've laughed at? The galaxy is full of people they've dismissed. We're not the only ones they think are nothing." And she let that sit, and then she said, "I wonder what would happen if all the nothings got together." I want to tell you about that old woman, because she became the architect of everything that followed, and almost no one outside this story knows her name. She was the eldest of our delegation, brought along, I had assumed, as a kind of honored elder, a figurehead, someone whose long life and quiet wisdom lent dignity to our petition. She had said almost nothing in the chamber. She had simply watched the great powers, watched the laughter, watched it all with an old woman's patient, unsurprised eyes, the eyes of someone who had seen a great deal of life and was not, at this late date, going to be shattered by a roomful of arrogant strangers. And when the rest of us came out of that chamber broken, our hope in ruins, she came out thinking. While we were grieving, she was already working, already turning the humiliation over in her mind, already seeing the shape of the thing the council had accidentally shown us. Because she had watched the laughter differently than the rest of us, we had felt it as a wound, she had studied it as information. And what she had seen, watching the mighty laugh at us, was not just our own humiliation but the practiced ease of it, the way the great powers laughed at the small like people who had done it 1,000 times, like it was routine, like dismissing a hopeful little world, was simply a thing that happened in that chamber regularly enough that everyone knew their part. "They've done that before," she said to us in the corridor while we were still reeling. "Many times. You don't get that good at laughing at someone unless you've had a lot of practice. Think about how many small peoples must have come to that chamber, full of hope, the way we did. Think about how many they've laughed at just like that and sent home feeling like nothing. There must be hundreds. Out there in the galaxy right now, there must be hundreds of peoples who got the same laughter we just got, each one sitting alone on its own little world, thinking it's the only one, thinking it really is nothing." She paused. "They're not nothing. We're not nothing. We're just alone, and alone is a thing you can fix." I did not fully understand in that corridor what she was proposing. None of us did. It sounded at first like the bitter consolation of a defeated old woman, a nice idea with no teeth, so the little people should band together and hold hands. The council had fleets. The council had 10,000 years of accumulated power. What did it matter if the nothings got together, when the nothings were, by definition, those without power? But she saw what we didn't, and over the years that followed she would teach it to all of us, the thing that turned out to be the truest fact about the galaxy, and the one the council most needed no one to notice, that the council's power was not as real as it looked, that a great power is only great as long as everyone agrees to be small in front of it, that the entire towering edifice of council supremacy rested on a foundation of nothing but the isolation of the dismissed, and that isolation was not a law of nature. It was a trick, and tricks can be undone, by anyone patient enough and humble enough to go from little world to little world, undoing it. That was it. That was the whole idea, spoken in a corridor outside the chamber where we'd just been humiliated, by a tired old woman who saw further than any of us. We had gone to the council alone, one small world hoping to be welcomed by the mighty, and we had been laughed out of the room, and the lesson we took from it was not we must become mighty too. The lesson we took was we are not the only ones they laughed at, and the only reason their contempt works is that they face us one at a time. The council's power, we began to understand, was not really in their fleets or their wealth, though they had those. It was in the dismissal itself, in their ability to make every small people believe it was alone, insignificant, powerless, a single nothing that could be waved away. They ruled the galaxy not by conquering the small, but by convincing the small that they didn't count, keeping them scattered, isolated, each one certain of its own nothingness, never imagining that there might be strength in numbers, never thinking to combine, divide and dismiss. That was the whole engine of the council's power, and the old woman had seen in the very moment of our humiliation the one thing that could break it. So we did not go home and build warships. I know that's what the title of this story makes you expect. Humanity returned with a fleet. And I know what you're picturing, the Armada, the human war machine come back to make the council pay. That is not what we did, and it is not what the fleet was, and the gap between what you're expecting and what actually happened is the whole point. We went home, yes, but we did not spend the years that followed building weapons. We spent them building something the council had never imagined anyone would bother to build, because the council could not conceive of it as power at all. We spent those years going out among the small peoples, the dismissed worlds, the overlooked and the minor and the laughed at, all the nothings of the galaxy that the council had spent 10,000 years keeping scattered and convinced of their own insignificance. We went to them, one by one, world by world, people by people, and we did the thing no one had ever done for them. We took them seriously. That was the whole of our diplomacy in those years. Not threats, not bribes, not the cold transactional dealing that passed for diplomacy in the council's galaxy. We simply went to the overlooked peoples and treated them as what the council insisted they were not, as equals, as people who mattered, as worlds whose hopes and griefs and gifts were real and worth respecting. We listened to them. We learned them. We found out who they were, these peoples the council had dismissed, and we discovered what the council had spent so long making sure no one discovered, which was that they were not nothing at all, that every one of these insignificant worlds had something, had worth, had dignity, had a contribution to make, and had been told for so long that it was nothing that it had half come to believe it. And we said to each of them in our way the thing that no one in the galaxy had ever said to them: you are not nothing. You were never nothing. They only made you feel that way to keep you alone, and you are not alone anymore. I spent those years on a ship, going from overlooked world to overlooked world, and I will tell you, it was the best work I have ever done, and it changed me more than the laughter ever could have. Because I watched it happen, again and again. I watched a small, dismissed people, who had spent generations believing the council's verdict that they didn't count, slowly straighten up under the simple experience of being taken seriously. I watched worth come back into peoples who had forgotten they had any. I watched the wound of dismissal, the same wound the council had put in us, begin to heal in world after world, simply because someone had finally come and treated them as if they mattered. And I watched, as the years passed, these scattered, overlooked peoples begin to find each other, through us, because of us, as we connected them, world to world, people to people. A network of the dismissed slowly waking up to the fact that there were so many of them, that they were not each a lonely nothing but part of a vast, overlooked majority, that the galaxy the council ruled was mostly made of peoples the council had taught to feel small. Let me tell you about one of them, because the pattern was always the same, and one example will show you the whole of it. There was a people, I'll keep their name to myself because their dignity is theirs, on a poor world far from anything, who had gone to the council once, generations before us, and been laughed at exactly as we had been, and had gone home and never tried again, and had spent the generation since quietly believing the verdict the council had handed them, that they were nothing, a minor people of no consequence, lucky to be left alone. When our ship arrived, they did not even know why we had come. No one came to them. They were not on anyone's route, not worth anyone's visit, a forgotten world the galaxy flew past. And when we explained that we had come simply to meet them, to know them, to talk as equals, they did not believe us at first. They kept waiting for the catch, the demand, the thing we wanted from them, because in their whole experience no one had ever come to a world like theirs except to take something. It took time to convince them that we wanted nothing, that we had come only because they were there and they mattered and we wished to know them. And when they finally believed it, when it finally landed, that someone from the stars had crossed the dark just to treat them as people worth crossing the dark for, I watched something happen in that whole world that I will never forget. I watched a people remember they were a people. They began to show us things, their art, their history, the things they had made and done and been, all the worth they had stopped showing anyone because they had been taught no one wanted to see it. And as they showed us, they seemed to see it again themselves, through our interested eyes, to remember that it was good, that they were not nothing, that the council's old verdict had been a lie they had been carrying so long they'd mistaken it for the truth. The elder who finally spoke for them, when we asked if they might join the thing we were building, this network of the overlooked, wept openly and said, "I'm translating roughly, we thought we were the only ones. All this time, we thought we were the only ones it had happened to. And you're telling me there are hundreds of us." And then fiercely through the tears, "Yes, whatever it is you are building, yes. We have been alone for 200 years because they told us we were nothing and we believed them. We are done being alone. We are done believing them." That was every world. Not the details, every people was different, every world its own. And that was the point, that was the wealth of the thing we were building. The sheer staggering variety of all these peoples the council had flattened into a single word, insignificant. But the shape was always the same. The long-carried wound of dismissal, the disbelief that anyone had come, the slow dawning that they were not alone, and then the fierce, glad straightening up of a people remembering its own worth and choosing, at last, to stand. World by world, year by year, we gathered them. Not under us, never under us, that was the whole difference between what we were building and what the council had built. But with us, beside us, a widening circle of the overlooked who had discovered, through being taken seriously by someone at last, that they had been the majority all along. That's where I have to stop, this first time. Because what we built out of all that, what the network of the dismissed became, and what we brought back to the council that had laughed at us, the fleet that was not a fleet, the thing that changed the galaxy not by conquering it but by ending the lie at the heart of its power. And the day we returned, all of us, the nothings together, to the chamber where one small world had been laughed at alone. That's the whole of the story, and I need you standing exactly here first. In a corridor outside the Galactic Council, a humiliated delegation from a small laughed-at world, and a tired old woman saying the words that would change the galaxy. I wonder what would happen if all the nothings got together, not yet knowing that we were about to spend years finding out, and that the answer would be the most powerful force the galaxy had ever seen, and that it would not fire a single shot. It took years. I want to be honest about that because the stories always compress it, always make it sound like humanity went out and came back with a fleet in a season, and the truth is that what we built took the better part of a generation, slow and patient and unglamorous, the way real things get built. There was no dramatic montage. There was just the work, ship after ship, world after world, year after year, the long, humble labor of going to the overlooked peoples of the galaxy and taking them seriously, one at a time, and stitching them slowly together into something that had never existed before. And the something we built was not, at first, anything the council would have recognized as a threat, which is exactly why they let it happen. They knew we were out there, of course. They were not blind. They saw the small human ships moving among the minor worlds, visiting the dismissed peoples, and they noted it and they dismissed it, the way they dismissed everything small. What were the little worlds going to do, after all, by talking to each other? The council's contempt protected us. They could not imagine that anything we were doing mattered, because they could not imagine that the small peoples mattered, and so they watched humanity spend years building a vast network of the overlooked, and they felt no alarm at all, because in their understanding of power, a coalition of the powerless was just a larger quantity of nothing. They were so sure that nothing plus nothing equals nothing. They had never done the arithmetic the other way. But the network grew. And as it grew, it became something more than a network. It became a community. And then it became something I don't have a better word for than a people made of peoples. Hundreds of small, overlooked worlds who had discovered each other and discovered in each other the thing the council had stolen from all of them, the knowledge that they mattered. We connected them not just to humanity but to each other, and that was the real magic of it, the thing that made it more than just humanity collecting clients. We introduced the dismissed peoples to one another. We were the thread at first, but the fabric that grew was theirs. These hundreds of small worlds learning each other's names, trading with each other, helping each other, sharing what they had, discovering that the gifts the council had found worthless were precious to someone, that the world next door had exactly the thing your world lacked, that together they could do what none of them could do alone. The overlooked peoples of the galaxy, it turned out, had been a complete civilization all along, scattered and unaware of itself, each piece believing it was nothing because it could not see all the other pieces. We did not give them strength. We just helped them see the strength they had always had, the strength of their own numbers, their own variety, their own vast overlooked multitude. And I have to tell you about the ships, because the ships are where the word fleet comes from, and the truth of them is the whole inversion of this story. As the network grew, the peoples in it began to want to come together, to meet, to gather, to see with their own eyes the others who had been found. And so they came in their ships. And here is the thing. They did not have war fleets. These were poor worlds, dismissed worlds, minor peoples. What they had were the ordinary ships of ordinary peoples. Cargo haulers, passenger vessels, old freighters, little system runners, the working ships of small worlds going about their small lives. And as the coalition grew, these ships began to gather, hundreds and then thousands of them, drawn from every overlooked corner of the galaxy, a vast assembly of the most unremarkable vessels imaginable, and together in their thousands they made a fleet. Not a war fleet, a fleet of the ordinary. A fleet of cargo ships and passenger liners and little freighters, each one nothing on its own, each one beneath the council's notice, gathered together into a multitude that filled the dark. It was the most powerful-looking thing I have ever seen, and there was not a warship in it. Its power was entirely in its numbers, in what it represented, in the simple staggering fact of all those dismissed little ships, from all those dismissed little worlds, gathered in one place at last, no longer alone. The old woman lived to see it begin, though not to see the end. She died out among the stars in the middle of the work, the way she would have wanted, still going from world to world, still gathering the nothings until the very end. Before she died, she said a thing to me that I have built the rest of my life around. She said, "I was wrong at the start. I said I wondered what would happen if all the nothings got together. But that was the council's word, and I let it into my mouth. There are no nothings. There never were. There are just people the powerful found it convenient to call nothing so they wouldn't have to share. We didn't gather a fleet of nothings, Cass. We gathered a galaxy. It was always there. They just had everyone convinced it wasn't. And then she asked me to finish it, to take what we had built back to the council, to the chamber where it had all started, where one small world had been laughed at alone. Take them all, she said. Take the whole galaxy they pretended was nothing, and let them walk into that room, and let's see who laughs. So we did. That is the return. That is the fleet that came back to the Council, not humanity's armada, but the gathered ships of hundreds of overlooked peoples, the whole vast coalition of the dismissed, come at last to the seat of the power that had dismissed them. We brought them to the Council world, and we filled the space around it with our fleet of ordinary ships, thousands of them, more vessels than had ever gathered in one place in the history of that Council, and not one of them a warship, and all of them together a power the Council had no answer for, because it was not a power their weapons could touch. And then a delegation went down to the chamber. Not humanity's delegation. A delegation of all of us humans, yes, but beside us the representatives of 100 peoples the Council had laughed out of that same room over the long centuries, the dismissed and the overlooked, walking back in together, into the great hall of the mighty, to take the seats they had been denied. I was there for that too. I had been there for the laughter all those years before, a junior delegate watching her species be turned into a joke. And now I walked back into that same chamber, no longer junior, no longer alone, at the head of a delegation that represented more peoples and more worlds than the Council itself. And I watched the great powers of the galaxy look up and see us come in, and I watched them understand slowly what they were looking at. They had expected, if they expected anything, humanity come back to grovel again, or perhaps humanity come back with threats. They had not expected this. They had not expected the doors to open and the dismissed to walk in, all of them, people after people after people, world after world, the whole overlooked majority of the galaxy filing into the chamber of the mighty, filling it, outnumbering them, standing in the great hall as equals because we had simply decided, all of us together, to stop accepting that we were not. And the chamber was very quiet. There was no laughter this time. The great powers sat in their silence and watched the galaxy they had dismissed walk in and fill their hall, and I watched the thing they had never once felt in 10,000 years arrive on their faces. The dawning understanding that they were outnumbered, that they had always been outnumbered, that the entire basis of their supremacy, the isolation of the small, had been quietly dissolved while they laughed, and that the powerless they had ruled by keeping apart had at last come together. They could not laugh at us now. You cannot laugh at the majority of the galaxy standing in your hall. The laughter only ever worked when we came one at a time. We had stopped coming one at a time. That's where I have to stop this first time. Because what happened in that chamber when the dismissed finally stood together before the mighty, what we said, and what we did not do, which was the most important part, because we did not do the thing the Council feared and the thing this story's title might make you expect. And how the galaxy actually changed, that day and in the days after, not through conquest but through the simple, irreversible fact of the small refusing ever again to be divided. That's the resolution, the whole of it, and I need you standing exactly here first, in the great hall of the Galactic Council, where one small world was once laughed at alone, watching the doors open and the whole overlooked galaxy walk in together, filling the chamber of the mighty in a silence where the laughter used to be. The dismissed come home at last to take their seats, and the great powers, for the first time in 10,000 years, with nothing to say. There is a moment when you have power over the people who once humiliated you, when the whole of who you are gets decided. We had it, standing in that chamber. I want you to understand how completely we had it, because the choice we made only means something if you understand that the other choice was real and was ours to take. We had come back to the Council that had laughed at us, and we had come back stronger than them, not in weapons, but in the only currency that actually mattered, which was numbers, legitimacy, the simple, overwhelming fact of representing more of the galaxy than they did. The mighty old powers who had ruled for 10,000 years by keeping the small divided were sitting in their hall, outnumbered, their trick exposed, their supremacy dissolved, looking up at a coalition that could, that day, have simply taken everything from them. We could have made them pay. We could have done to them precisely what they had done to us and called it justice, humiliated them, stripped them, laughed them out of their own chamber, ground the arrogant old powers into the nothing they had always insisted we were. The galaxy was watching. The dismissed were behind us in their thousands. The moment was ours, and it was a moment that could have gone the way these moments almost always go, the way the whole long, bloody history of the galaxy said it should go. The formerly powerless, having gathered strength, becoming the new tyrants, the wheel turning, the laughed, at becoming the laughers. We did not do it, and the not doing it is the thing that actually changed the galaxy more than the fleet, more than the coalition, more than any of it. Because what we said when we finally spoke in that silent chamber was not a sentence of judgment. It was an invitation. I was one of the ones who spoke. I had earned that, I suppose, across the years of the work, and the old woman was gone and someone had to. So I stood in the chamber where I had once watched my species become a joke, and I looked at the great powers who had laughed at us, sitting now in their stunned silence, and I did not gloat, and I did not threat, though every part of me that remembered the laughter wanted to. I said instead something close to this. I said, "We came here once alone, full of hope, and you laughed at us. And then we went out into the galaxy you rule, and we found out that you had laughed at hundreds of us the same way and sent us all home alone, each of us believing we were nothing. We are not nothing. We never were. And now we are not alone. We have come back, all of us together, and as you can see, there are rather more of us than there are of you." I let that sit the way the old woman would have, and then I said the thing that mattered, the thing she had taught me. "We could do to you now what you did to us. We have the numbers, we have the moment, and there is a version of this where we take everything from you and call it fair, but we are not going to do that, because we did not gather the galaxy to build a new tyranny on the bones of the old one. We gathered it because every single one of these peoples knows what it is to be dismissed, and a people that knows that wound does not go on to deal it to others. We are not here to laugh at you. We are here to do the thing you never did. We are here to make room." And that was it. That was the whole of what changed the galaxy, not a conquest, an expansion of the table. We did not overthrow the council. We opened it, forced it open, by sheer weight of numbers, but opened it rather than smashed it, transformed it from the private club of the mighty into something that had never existed in the galaxy before. A body where the small peoples held their seats, where the dismissed had voices, where the overlooked majority of the galaxy was finally, actually represented in the place where the decisions were made. We did not throw the great powers out. We made them share the room, made them sit, for the first time, beside the peoples they had laughed at, as equals, in a chamber that now held the whole galaxy instead of just its loudest fraction. The mighty did not lose their place. They lost their monopoly. And that, it turned out, was enough to change everything, because almost every cruelty in that galaxy had depended on the small being unrepresented, unheard, alone. And the moment they were none of those things anymore, the moment the overlooked majority had a voice and a vote and each other, the whole architecture of casual dismissal that the council had been built on simply could not stand. The galaxy changed not because we conquered it, but because we finished the sentence the council had started 10,000 years before and never meant to complete, a community of peoples. They had built a club and called it that. We made it true. People tell this story now as a tale of human might. The council laughed at Earth, and humanity returned with a fleet that changed the galaxy. And they imagine, I think, the Armada, the reckoning, the proud species come back to take its rightful place at the top. And every time I correct them, because I was there at the beginning and there at the end, and it was the opposite of that in every way that matters. We did not come back to take a place at the top. We came back to tear down the top, not the powers who sat there, but the idea of it, the idea that the galaxy had a top and a bottom, that some peoples mattered and others were nothing. That power was a thing you hoarded by keeping others small. The fleet that changed the galaxy was not a fleet of warships. It was a fleet of the overlooked, the dismissed, the laughed at, 10,000 ordinary ships from 1,000 small worlds, gathered together to prove the one thing the mighty most needed no one to prove. that there was no such thing as a nothing, that there never had been, that every people the powerful had waved away was a whole world entire, and that all those worlds together were not the bottom of the galaxy but the body of it. And humanity's part in it. I want to be clear about this because the story gets that wrong too, makes us the heroes, the saviors, the great power that lifted up the small. We were not. We did not lift anyone up. We were just the first to go around and say out loud the thing that was already true, that they were not alone and not nothing, and that the laughter only worked because they had believed it. We did not give the small peoples their strength. They always had it. We just helped them stop believing the lie that they didn't, and once they stopped believing it, they did the rest themselves. The galaxy did not change because humanity was mighty. It changed because humanity, having been laughed at, having felt that particular wound of being dismissed as nothing, refused to keep the lesson to ourselves, went out and found everyone else who carried the same wound and said, "You too, us too, come on, let's go back together." That is the whole of it. That is what changed the galaxy, not a weapon, a sentence. You are not alone. I am old now, the way the woman who started all this was old when she said the words in that corridor. I have lived to see the galaxy she imagined, not perfect. Nothing is but real. A galaxy where the small have voices, where no people sits alone believing it is nothing, where the table is open and the room holds everyone. And I think about the laughter sometimes, the laughter that started it all, and I am almost grateful for it. In the strange way you become grateful for the wound that taught you the most. Because if they had welcomed us that first day, if the council had been kind, had let one small hopeful world take its quiet seat among the mighty, we would have taken that seat and been grateful, and the galaxy would have gone on exactly as it was, the small still dismissed, the overlooked still alone, the whole cruel architecture of nothing and everything still standing. It was the laughter that saved us. It was the laughter that sent us out among the dismissed instead of up into the club. They laughed at one small world to keep it in its place, and in doing so they sent that world out to gather all the others, and that is how the mightiest power in 10,000 years was undone, not by a fleet that fired on it, but by the people it had laughed at, coming back together, and refusing ever again to be small. The council laughed at Earth, and we came back with a fleet, and the fleet did change the galaxy, and the galaxy still tells the story, but it tells it wrong, and now you know the right of it. The fleet was everyone they ever called nothing. The weapon was the word together, and the thing that changed the galaxy forever was not that the small had finally become mighty. It was that the small had finally stopped agreeing to be small, and discovered, all at once, in a chamber that had only ever known their laughter, that there were so many more of us than there had ever been of them, and that there always, always had been.